I would be jumping up and down saying yes. Flagstaff hasn't been great for our family. It hasn't. I think that Utah's home.
Now I've got Mary mad and I've got Christine mad. Get in the car, let's go.
I don't think this trip is starting out very well. I'm just saying maybe this is why we take separate cars.
Oh.
This is fun, traveling with a bunch of bossy women.
We should call Nancy on the way. Nancy's our family therapist.
And Christine and I have had our little struggle because it doesn't work for her.
It wasn't a little struggle, mind you.
Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is February 22nd. Last night was Sister Wives. Frida in the back over there gonna find her perfect spot, and we are going to do the recap of last night's episode. Before I let you know anything about your favorite star, Frida, she is a Treen Walker Coonhound mix. For those of you who are asking, she's 2 years old and she literally hates pillows on the couch. Last night, the Sister Wives, the Browns, they went back to Utah and they took a road trip to visit the Darger family. So this is an interesting one because a few things happen. They go on a road trip, and before they go on the trip, they all meet at Mary's house the day before to talk about why they're going to visit the Dargers and recap everything that happened to them when they fled Utah. So if you remember way back when this series started, the Browns went public, and when the Browns went public, the state of Utah opened an investigation into the family for violating law, bigamy and polygamy, and in the cover of darkness, they fled to Las Vegas, and then when they got to Las Vegas, they ended up suing the state of Utah. The courts actually sided with them, and then the Supreme Court ultimately overturned their lawsuit. And now they were sort of in this limbo status where they can't go back to Utah because now, at the time of filming, it was a felony. At the time of filming, Utah had passed legislation that basically made cohabitation in polygamy a felony. In the country, polygamy is illegal. It's illegal everywhere, and it's a felony in nearly every single state. But the state of Utah had a specific component of their laws that made cohabitation a felony. So even though you were like living in polygamy, you could not live in one house. So if you were all living in one house and all had the same husband and you were all calling each other sister wives, that basically was a felony with a sentence of up to 3 to 5 years in prison. Advocates to turn over this law basically said that the law was so strict that anyone that was involved in polygamy was so afraid to get help for any issues that they were facing. They were so afraid to do anything because basically announcing that you were a polygamist meant that you were admitting that you were a felon. So they pushed for legislation to diminish the law from a felony to a misdemeanor, and effectively it did pass, but at the time of filming it didn't. And the Browns sort of lament about what it would be like to move back to Utah if it became an infraction. So Kody had wanted to go back to Utah, and he had proposed at one point that the family move to St. George. Now, their church has locations in St. George. They were previously in Salt Lake City and in Lehigh, and the family has relatives in St. George, and the family has relatives in St. George and in Salt Lake City. Knowing all of that and discussing about the parameters of if they would go back, Kody sort of presents to the family like, what if it was only an infraction? I mean, wouldn't that be great? And of course the wives are like, whoa, like we're not moving. You know, Robyn gets really upset, and Janelle basically says she's been thriving there.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool if it was just like a parking ticket?
I'm just gonna pretend I didn't hear Kody's question.
And then Christine, who's not on the phone, who's not at the meeting, but she's on the phone call because she's apparently working in Phoenix. She says that she was really glad that she was not in the room because had Kody said that and she had been in the room, she probably would have jumped up and down and said, yes, let's move back to Utah.
I think that Utah's home. Utah feels like home.
Christine believes that Utah has not been good for the family because the family is not flourishing there. unlike what Janelle says. Christine says they don't have family there, they don't have friends there. And according to people that live in Flagstaff, they literally do not want the Browns there at all. In fact, I got an email like not too long ago by someone who lived in the area, and they were so mad at me for even covering them. They said they wouldn't even watch me anymore because they didn't want me to promote their lifestyle, and Flagstaff did not want them there. And I was like, whoa. So Flagstaff has been less than excited about the Browns being there, FYI. They all finish up their meeting and they talk about whether or not they're going to drive in one car. They discuss about how they had this conversation, and Kody basically says that, you know, we don't like to spend time together, and if we can't travel together, like, why bother even going? Like, so obvious that we don't want to spend time together, so we need to do this all together, right? So they decide that they're going to take one car and they're going to drive to Utah to have a conversation with the Dargers about the upcoming legislation, because the Dargers were also outspoken advocates. They are another polygamous family that has 3 wives, and they also have been working to change the laws in Utah to minimize the felony and make it an infraction, and basically help people to be able to get help, but still hold accountable the crimes that occur in these communities related to child brides and other welfare and fraud offenses. Got it? So the next day they all meet up, and Kody arrives at Christine's house, and he starts packing the car, and Christine's like super pissed off because the car is like totally packed, and Kody brought apparently too many shoes, and she wants to take 2 cars. Like, Christine tries to get out of taking one car the entire time.
It's not going to fit in the car. Based on luggage, we're taking 2 cars.
Stop.
Then they notice as they finally pull out and Kody gets everything shoved in that her tire is like low on pressure. And then they get to Mary's house, and then Kody's all like, oh my gosh, we're getting a flat tire. I can hear it. And then
Christine, we have a flat. We're going right to the dealership.
No, we don't.
Yes, I can hear it.
And then Christine's like, but I just drove to Phoenix. And then Kody's just like, whatever, we need to go fix it now. You know, and he's like having a spaz. And then they finally like settle him down. Christine says, well, let's just take a different car. And Kody's like, no. And Robyn's like, let's take my minivan. And Kody's like, that's not cool.
Listen, if we want to make this trip, we are not taking this car.
I want to take the Audi. Anyways, they agree to get everyone in the car. They go pick up Janelle, and they run over to the tire store, right? So they get to the tire store, and apparently the tire had a nail in it. And again, Christine gets salty with him and is like, well, we could always take 2 cars or could take another car. And she's mad now because she knew that it wouldn't be a big quick fix, because Kody was adamant that fixing a tire would only take 20 minutes. Like, what world do you live in, Kody, where you think changing a tire, getting a new tire on a foreign car, a foreign luxury car, by the way, whose parts are not easily to obtain. Anyways, the car place doesn't have the right size tire because it's an Audi, and they have to take a new car. So eventually Kody succumbs to the uncoolness of taking Robyn's minivan, and they all climb into Robyn's minivan and eventually get on the road to go to Utah.
Right. He just doesn't think a minivan is cool.
Okay, the tire's unrepairable completely.
On the road, they start talking about how they're super scared to go back to Utah because anytime they go back there, they know that they're entering a state where their family is illegal. And Janelle gets scared that they could get arrested, so she wants Kody not to speed because she knows that if Kody does speed, they could tack on the felony of polygamy, because she says that's just what they do. Like, you get a simple ticket for something else, and then they tack on the felony charge for polygamy. And then she's concerned because Kody, having 4 wives, could end up going to jail for like 15 years.
Are they going to use it as an opportunity to tack on the felony polygamy charge? Because that's usually how it works. They get you for something else.
So they're scared, and they're super scared because their family is illegal there. But FYI, you guys, their family is literally illegal in every single state. Polygamy is not legal in any state. There's a federal law against polygamy, and some states just have stricter laws than others. As you should know, it is a felony in the state of Arizona to practice polygamy. When they get to Utah, we meet the Dargers. And after all of that fighting about whether or not it was going to be okay to be in the car together, turns out it was fine, because Janelle said they talked about whether or not Kody puts the toilet seat up or down, and they caught up on their kids, and it was really not that bad. So Christine, again, was looking kind of like a crank for not wanting to be with everyone, and apparently everything was fine. So then they get over to the Dargers' house, And the Dargers are independent, fundamentalist Mormons. So they're not part of a specific church. Joe is the patriarch, and his wives are Vicky, Valerie, and Alina. And apparently Joe, so Joe grew up as a polygamist. All of them actually did. He's a 5th generation. Apparently back when he was getting married, he did something completely unique, and he courted and married Vicky and Alina at the very same time. And then 10 years later, he married Valerie. Now, Valerie is actually Vicky's twin sister, identical twin sister. So Valerie ends up getting divorced from her husband, and she decides to marry Joe. And then so she brought 5 kids in with her that were from her previous marriage, and she also had 4 children with Joe. So Alina has 7 kids, Vicky has 9 kids, and Valerie has 9 kids. 4 of those are Joe's.
Joe married Alina and Vicky forever ago. And then years and years later, Val was married. She got a divorce from her husband, and she married Joe.
So now they all live in one house, and so they have lunch together. Kody's like super jazzed about how, they're all going to have some fellowship time. They start talking about kids. Apparently their youngest daughter is 6. And so that Vicky says that their youngest daughter is 6, and then, they start talking about whether or not they're going to have any more children. And then Kody's just like, I don't know, I've been wanting to be a dad forever. And so I just, I can't think about, maybe I just want one more. And then that gets Robyn super annoyed because she realizes that he's basically talking about her uterus, because she's the only one of his wives that are still looking, that might potentially have children. And she said it's not up for public discussion, blah, blah, blah. Although she doesn't say that publicly. She says that in her interview. Privately.
He's deciding whether or not he should have more children. I'm like, well, it's like you have to have a partner.
Then they all get into the kitchen. The kitchen is like a super open space. It's all really nicely laid out. Actually, it looks like they have some sort of rambler. I don't know if they actually have like a basement or not. I'm not sure how houses work in Utah, but it had a really nice open layout. And they said that they designed that kitchen specifically for a space where they could all share and congregate. They have 9 kids that still live in the house. And they start talking about like housing and, what they want to do. And Joe says his ideal life house would be that he has his own bedroom. And Kody's like, I'll never get my own bedroom. And then Robyn gets all feisty, and she's like, well, he can deal with not having a bedroom if I have to share him.
You'll survive if I can survive sharing you and dealing with the jealousy and the drama and all the stuff that has to do with plural marriage. Then you'll be.
And I have to deal with the jealousy and the drama. Okay, we get it, Robyn. You're the favorite. So then they sit down after making their lunches, and they really start to talk more about the one house idea. Kody actually talks about the one house that he proposed, and then he actually throws Christine under the bus and basically says that Christine is the one that killed the one house idea. She did not want to do it. Kody also said that he felt like a failure because he can't make his family be together, and the symptom and the problem with the family must be that he has somehow created this and he doesn't know what the problem is. They also talked about how, and this is weird, but he said, if you have a one house idea and your sister wives hate each other, and he goes, not that that's happening in our family.
But if you're in love with 2 women and you're married to them and they don't really like each other, having them live together would be soul killing for them.
But you can't do that because then you create hell on earth for them. So it's not like our family, but it's kind of our family. Basically admitting that his sister wives don't like each other, which is, I'm guessing Christine does not like Robyn. Robyn does not like Christine, vice versa, whatever. So then the interesting thing is they start talking about children and how, when you do live in one house, the kids have a more connected feel to the sister wives. Robyn laments that she feels like a stepmom. And then Janelle,
I'm just going to be frank here. I'm like a stepmom.
And then Janelle talks about how the younger kids don't have the same relationship with the sister wives. And again, in a subtle jab to Mary, mentions that if her kids wanted to go over to Christine's house, they would feel totally comfortable, especially the older ones, because Christine and her were close and their kids were close growing up. She didn't mention Mary because we know that the older kids literally hate Mary. Mary and Kody almost get into a fight, and then Robyn thwarts it because Mary's like, I don't ask you for anything. And he's all like, what? And she's like, yeah, like I cut that string a long time ago. And then Robyn gets up and starts dancing, and she doesn't want them to start fighting. And then they sort of start talking about the law and whether or not they can change the law and the dynamics of the law and like coming out and living openly. They bring in some history and they talk about Christine's grandfather, who was the former head of their church. So Kody mentions that Christine's grandfather was the head of the AUB, and he had really wanted people to be open. Christine talked about how, you know, her grandfather had advocated for polygamists to be open to sort of break that stigma, to show them that they are all normal, consenting people. Now, proponents of polygamy will say there's no such thing as consent, because within this hierarchy and this religion, the women are sort of browbeat to believe that they have no choice, no options, and that their only goal in life is to submit to a husband. And so out of the brainwashing, they say that there's no such thing as actual consent, because if these women were given a chance in a different direction, they might not have made that choice. But because it's how they are conditioned, it's like consent by default, if that makes sense. So anyways, they all meet and they all have fun, and basically they talk about how it's a felony and they're worried about getting arrested, and Kody still fears about getting arrested, and the Dargers fear about getting arrested. So they do hope that the legislation will change. Dargers kind of talk about how they really like that they live in one house and they would never do it any other way, and blah, 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 blah. You know, the Dargers are, I don't know, they're controversial at best. They were on a docu-series way back when called My Three Wives. They've been kind of in and out of the headlines. They actually had a child that passed away from a heart defect when they were a baby, and because they were polygamous, they had this huge investigation which basically determined that it was natural causes, but because they were polygamists, it created this huge like investigation for neglect. They were furious about how they were treated as a family, and it works. And so because of the way that they were treated, because of their child's passing and the investigation that followed, they have been working to improve legislation and laws for polygamists. So that's the thing. They all say that they are law-abiding citizens. They're not doing things outside of the law like child brides or fraud or Medicaid or anything, or welfare fraud, even though all the sister wives at one point have filed for bankruptcy at some point. So I'm not sure if that was happening before or after, but I digress. And now everyone is on the up and up. So what's going to happen next? Here are my takeaways. Kody's still salty at Christine because she killed the one house idea. Kody still wants a one house. Kody would love to move back to Utah, even though he says he doesn't want to move back to Utah. Christine wants to move back to Utah. The entire family is really sad about how they're not around any polygamists anymore, and how being around like the normal people like that don't have 37 wives, being in the monogamous world has made them more monogamous, and therefore they're not struggling together, they're not growing together. They are learning how to be more monogamous than they are polygamous, and they think they would all of them kind of agreed that they would benefit from being more in a polygamous community, but at this point it's not possible. So Christine in the coming episodes is going to advocate because she wants to move to Utah. She and Kody are going to get into another fight. I think this season we're going to see a lot of fighting between her, Christine, and Kody. And I think we're going to see a lot of fighting because next week we also see a fight between Kody and Mary. So two wives are still pissed at Kody, and Miss Janelle is still keeping sweet, and Robyn is still acting like she owns Kody. So that's what we have for this week's episode. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.